What's up, YouTube? Super excited to bring you this interview with Jordan Pettay. Jordan is one of my favorite alto players in New York City to get to play in big bands with, and other types of bands that would include multiple saxophones. Originally from Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, she went to the Booker T. Washington Performing Arts High School. After graduating high school, she received a full ride to the Juilliard School of Music in New York City. She's gotten to play with musicians all across the musical spectrum: Christian McBride, Lizzo, as well as Rakim. On top of being a great saxophone player and side woman, she is also a band leader in her own right. She has an album that was released in 2019 on Outside In Records called First Fruit. All of this information can be found in the description of this video. If you like what you heard in this solo clip so far, you're definitely going to like her album and want to check out her music. A lot of the music on this record has a gospel influence. Jordan is a very devout follower of Christianity, and you can hear this influence in all of her music. I particularly liked this interview because Jordan touches upon some of the real truths about being a musician and some of the psychology and things that we deal with as musicians when we're trying to maybe impress other musicians versus playing what is true to us. Enough for me though, let's get to the interview and hear some of Jordan's great insights about music. Today we have Jordan Pettay, who is so kind to be a part of this. I've admired your playing for many, many years now, and it was so great to get to play some of the gigs that we played together in the New Alchemy Jazz Orchestra. It's just great to have you on. Just really looking forward to getting your perspective. So thank you, Jordan.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Steve.
My pleasure. Let's just jump right into it. So the first question is going to be, um, when was your first like major kind of light bulb moment with your development as an improviser? Like, was there any point where you were just like, this makes sense? And, I think for all of us, we kind of have that maybe like the flip of a switch where improvisation is something that you connect with and something that you feel like you want to pursue as a vocation. And I realize that those might be two separate questions, but feel free to share any of that experience that you have.
Yeah, I think the earliest memory I have is actually goes before I even started playing the saxophone. But I remember in like a fifth grade music class, it was like one of those days where the teacher was like, "Oh, we're gonna watch a movie today." So she put on a Louis Armstrong documentary, and I was not really familiar with him at the time, but
Mhm.
it was just kind of like really just about the whole concept of improvisation and how he was such an innovator in that, and one of the first major jazz improvisers, and just that whole concept of playing as you go, spontaneous composition on your instrument. I don't know, something about that. Even as a fifth grade person at kid, I didn't have any jazz training. I didn't play the saxophone yet at that time, but I was just like, that is so cool. I don't know, I just was like very fascinated with the concept of improvisation.
Yeah.
And then, so I grew up in Texas. So then the next year in sixth grade is when they started band. And for some reason, I always just had a desire to play the saxophone. I think because my dad listened to a lot of instrumental R&B, like smooth jazz. So I was familiar with like David Sanborn and like Kenny G and stuff like that. So
Sure.
I think that's what introduced me to the sound of the instrument, and it just kind of quickly progressed after that. I once I had private lessons, and I had really fantastic teachers who were into jazz, and were able to show me like Charlie Parker and
Mhm.
Lester Young and stuff like that. And I remember just like hearing these players and just being so, I don't know, I was like, I instantly fell in love with it. I just thought it was so cool. And yeah, it just really progressed really quickly for me, honestly. I was very passionate early on.
Yeah, and that's something I don't know if I've heard anybody say yet, is just that you kind of became aware of improvisation before even thinking about the instrument. Just like you were able to actually conceive that that was a thing that you could do, which is that's super heavy. Beautiful answer. So yeah, next question is, what is one thing you've been focusing on recently in your practice sessions? I know that like all of us are kind of working on different things as we get up to a certain point. So I guess the question is a little bit more pointed, is like, what have you been working on like recently, like say in the last couple weeks or something? Like what do you find yourself gravitating towards?
That's a good question. I feel like I'm just kind of sticking to foundational stuff. I'm just working on technical things, playing things in all keys. You probably are familiar with that Michael Brecker interview where they ask him about practicing and how he practices. He basically said, "Yeah, there are times where I'm working on new material and I'm like working on new concepts and stuff like that. But then he's like, I just also have periods where I'm just doing maintenance practicing, maintaining what I have." And for me, that kind of like made jazz and like being a musician a little more relatable, because I realized someone who reached the level of playing that he did still was not always trying to like get some crazy thing together, or like, but was just,
Yeah.
maintenance and just keeping what he had. I was like, all right, it's cool to like just not be doing anything super new right now, but just maintaining. So I feel like I'm kind of just in the foundational stuff like that, like playing tunes in all keys, or like little licks and, technical exercises and stuff like that.
Yeah, just making sure you can complete the tasks that your brain was thinking of, like in the moment on gigs and things like that. So, like, what's the last tune you worked on?
The last tune I worked on, well, I've been trying to work on playing fast.
Okay, nice.
So I was kind of reviewing some tunes that are typically played fast, like just one of those things, or strike up the band,
Right.
those kind
Did
of
did
those
that
kind of things.
get called on a gig recently, and
Um,
comfortable as you wanted it to be, or like what made those come to mind? I guess.
I think so. Yeah, for me, just a little background, like the last year or so, I have not been doing a lot of jazz gigs. I've
Mhm.
actually did a lot of wedding band work, and so I was just like, man, I feel like I'm a little out of practice, like playing
Gotcha.
jazz or like up tempo. So I just wanted to kind of make sure
Yeah.
I'm on top of things.
Totally.
Um, the part I realize is like you can practice a lot of things, but it's also hard to maintain certain things or know what to practice when you're not playing gigs. I feel like getting my butt kicked on gigs kind of dictates what I'm going to practice the most. You know what I mean? Because it's like,
Totally.
yeah, okay, there's a weakness there. Okay, yeah, there's a weakness there. So I feel like I'm a little concerned about maybe some blind spots here, because I haven't been doing a lot of jazz gigs. So just covering
Yeah,
my,
you don't remember what the challenges are sometimes until you
yeah,
actually get to the gig and are reminded. And it's always just like a little bit different. It always changes. So yeah, I totally can relate with that. And the maintenance thing, I think, yeah, that's totally universal for all levels. So it's great to hear you say that, and definitely like just mention that that's something that we're all dealing with. Or it's Michael Brecker when he was playing, he was playing his own like original band gigs probably for a majority of his later years, but he probably still would go back and work on standards because I'm sure he did side band gigs too and would find these challenges that are there. So very cool. Great answer. Thank you. So the next question is, who is the last saxophone player or musician that you listened to and you were like, wow, this is really great? And this could be like a recording that you listen to or a live performance, doesn't matter.
I haven't been listening to a lot of jazz recently, so I'm trying to rack my brain.
It could be, yeah, just anything you listen to, just like any group that just kind of moved you and that you were super impressed by.
I will say I trumpet player slash minister named Phil Driscoll, and I think
Mhm.
he has like some history playing trumpet with like some major bands like back in the day. But he kind of has like this recording of some really classic hymns and Christian songs that are kind of like in the repertoire of Christian music. And he kind of has this recording of a song called "I Exalt Thee," which I actually recorded on my album. It's a very simple song, but it's just got the thing on it. It's just it's a
Mhm.
powerful spiritual song, and he has kind of like this legendary recording of it. I don't know when it was. I think it was recorded in the 90s or something like that. It is like pretty widely known in a lot of like Christian circles. I was like watching a prayer meeting actually of like a ministry that I follow, and they had some music on the background. They were like, put on this song, put on I Exalt Thee. And man, like I heard that on the background. I'm just like getting blasted on the couch. I'm like, whoa, I feel
Yeah.
like I feel so I felt the presence of God, you know. So I was just like, whoa.
Hmm.
And it's not even like you know, it's not like he's doing a bunch of stuff. It's just like profound, you know, he's just playing the melodies and, you know, or playing around the melodies. And it just really, that's kind of like what I'm into, right?
Yeah.
more than more than a lot of things is just how can I play minimally or simply, but with a lot of impact, you know. And
Hmm.
so I love having a jazz background and like a jazz sensibility. That training, you know, really sets you up to do a lot of things musically. I also appreciate an element of appealing to wider audiences, and they may not care for like a Mixolydian scale, but if they hear something played with like really true conviction and with a great sound and with the right motivation and intention, it's like it's really powerful. That's kind of what I'm into, is just playing it in a way that carries. I mean, I'm very spiritual if no one knows me by
Yeah.
background, but I'm a Christian, and so I
Right.
really view music through that lens, and being more of a vessel to carry the presence of God more than my own uh, agenda or like whatever I want to do. You know, I don't. I'm always working on not playing for myself, but playing for others, and how can I be used to touch others through the sound of my instrument, basically. So
No,
that
it's
was a long
that's
answer, but Phil, check him out.
yeah, it was a great answer, and it definitely needs any of these answers need context at some point. So giving that clarity is great, and I always admire that about your playing because you always I never felt like there was any ego involved there. Like you always are playing and really trying to make just the best musical decisions possible for the band that's backing you and for the audience. And that's like a super hard balance to strike. But I never got the sense that your ego was ever involved when I listened to you play it. And that's, I think everybody appreciates that when they hear you. So that's
Oh,
really, really great. You know, as saxophone players, we're always curious what other people are listening to. But I think in general, we're always going to be into what other saxophone players are into, whether we know it or not. You know, there's so much music out there. This is totally unrelated and sort of nerdy saxophone information. But what is your current saxophone setup? Saxophone serial number, if it's a Mark 6 or something like that. Mouthpiece, reed strength, tip opening mouthpiece, all that stuff. If you know it.
yeah.
I just remember when I asked you the first time, it was like clearly something that you weren't thinking about, like you because you've been using the same setup for a while. Gear matters up to a certain point, right? And then from there, it's like once you find something that you like, it's up to you to sound great. And it seems like you already found that, so you probably don't really mess with gear too much. Is the vibe I got, last time I asked you this, but maybe it's the same, maybe it's changed. I don't know, but it's super curious.
Yeah, I think it might have changed since the last time we talked. But I want to talk about what you just said about, you know, how like to a certain extent the gear doesn't matter. I think for us, I think the gear matters for us and how we feel when we're playing more than the sound. Because I feel like our sound is going to come through for the most part. I mean, within reason, unless you're like really changing it up. But I
Hmm.
think for the most part, our sound is like just inherent. Like it's going to come out
Yeah.
whatever we use, and then more of like our comfort level, like how we want to feel like when we're playing and stuff, that determines our gear. And I will say I'm very low maintenance, but I think since the last time we talked, I'm still playing a Mark 6 143 serial range from 1967, I think is when it was made. I am playing the same ligature I've played since like sixth grade band, which is Banad. There it is, Banad.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And the mouthpiece that I'm doing, I think I might have been playing a Meyer last time we talked, and I'm
Mhm.
playing a LaBelle mouthpiece
Oh,
now that
cool.
I've had for a while, but I recently switched back in the last year or two. It's a very like wide chamber. I think it's like the equivalent of like an 8 star or something. It's very big.
Hmm.
I like the sound. It gives me like a nice rich sound. And the reeds that I'm using, I'm still not happy with everything. I've been kind of going between actually Rico Orange Box 3.5s have been kind of solid for me for a while.
Yeah.
But then also I'll switch to like Java reeds for like my pop gigs.
Right.
They kind of cut like a little more. So I like that. And Van Doren is still like very, I feel like their reads are very still kind of like very consistent compared to other reads. So that's
No,
what I like
that's
about Van Doren. Pop
right.
them out of the box and most of them can play.
Yeah, and they kind of stay the same way for like years at a time. I've definitely noticed like some shifts over longer periods of time, but yeah, you'll get consistency. Like if you can find something you like, you can count on it for, a long period of time. And that's a big, like I would call that like a tough setup, honestly, like to have an open piece that much and to play on that hard of a reed like that. I don't think I would be able to get a sound out of that, but that's like awesome that it's working for you, and I love your sound, so that's great.
No, it's working. Yeah, maybe it's not as big as I think it is, but I remember when I bought it, I was studying with Ron Blake and he looked at it, he was like, this mouthpiece is huge. And I was like,
Yeah.
is it? It felt good when I played it. I don't know.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So
Yeah, very cool. I don't hear LaBelle as much as I used to, I guess, but I mean anybody I know that has one of his pieces, they love him. So that's really cool too that you are revisiting that mouthpiece. Thank you for that information. I know that like all the saxophone nerd side of me always wants to know that stuff, even though it's not like maybe not the most important thing in the world, but it's always interesting, definitely, to just hear the variety that's out there. So two more questions. What was your most favorite gig that you've ever played, and why does that one stand out in your memory?
this is a good question. Well, I'll mention like okay, the first thing that comes to mind is first time I started doing like organ band gigs.
Mm,
I I had heard I don't know if you're familiar with Ben Patterson.
yeah,
Um, he's
he's a
amazing.
beast. Yeah.
Yeah, I love his playing, and I remember I was like checking him out at Showman's when Showman's was still open.
Hmm.
And I was like, man, this sounds great, you know. So I tried to I think I got a gig at like the garage or something when that was still open, and I called him for it, and he was down to do it. And I remember just like giving myself permission to like play the blues.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something like a lot of times like we struggle with um like being comfortable to like express yourself in that way musically, and you know,
Hmm.
not coming from like necessarily a bluesy background or like a gospel background, but always like loving it and hearing those things. And I feel like in some circles, some jazz circles, or like maybe it's just like jazz school, it's like okay, it's not cool to like play the blues, or it's not cool to like really just like
It's
play in
such
a
a
raw way
strange
or something.
phenomenon, right? Like I didn't really think about it until you just started talking about this, but like the only people that really frown on playing in that way are just like, more of a straight ahead and especially like a blues based sound, or like the students at a jazz school. Like the professors don't even
Yeah,
really
that's true. Yeah.
take away from it because they know the value of it, but it's always just like the students in school, which they're like the least informed people. They're going to school, and they're admitting that they're students of the art form. So it's so funny, but I mean I've been guilty of the same thing. It's just like wanting to be intellectual while you're playing, or get the feeling like, oh, I'm copying out, or this is easier to do
Right, right.
somehow, when that's not the case at all. It's like it's so gratifying, and your whole purpose when you're up there playing is to connect, and to play things that feel good and make people feel good. So why would you why would you take that away from yourself? But it's something that happens very, very often. I love that you're saying that, and like, especially having that be one of your favorite gig moments, because that's the same for me too. I feel the exact same way. When you were going to Showman's and hearing Ben, was that with Jerry Weldon playing?
Jerry Wilden was playing, who's amazing. I love his playing.
Hmm.
Um, I think he was probably pretty much the only saxophone player that I would hear playing with Ben. Because I think it would be Jerry Weldon's gigs and he would hire Ben. I think that's what it was
Right.
for the most part. But I remember, so I finally got Ben on the gig, and I remember like we played this gig, and it was just like such a release. It was like cathartic at the end. I was just like, wow, like that felt great. And I was like, it wasn't cheesy, it wasn't like disingenuous, like it was just like I fully embraced the grease, and it just like I let it
Yeah.
out, and it felt great. And I was like, man, like, and I think when it's done right, like there is, I think I understand the whole like cop out mentality because like when you're in sixth grade and you're like wanting you're first improvising, like this literally, I'm saying this because this was me. So
Yeah.
I was first learning how to improvise, and so like my band directors were like, okay, here's the pentatonic scale, here's the blues scale. I was like, great, like now I can improvise. So like, but I would just be like, that's all I would play. And I was
Hmm.
like, yeah, I'm not really like playing changes, you know? And so like there was a point where I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to like learn how to do that. So there is a pop-up mentality, I think, because maybe of our training and stuff, like, well, you can't just play the blues scale, like you gotta actually learn how to play language.
Yeah.
But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, like when you know how to use the blues scale like in a very musical and informed way, and it's like perfect, it's like
Yeah.
it's great when you play blues in that moment. And yeah, like I
Yeah.
said, it's such a different shift. Like just playing something that feels good, that's in the pocket, that's like expressive. It gets you out of your head because I feel like a lot of times as jazz musicians, like we get into our head and we start playing from an intellectual place, which isn't
Yeah.
bad, but I think we can lose the connection to our heart in that, because it's like it's
Totally.
great to like, have a bunch of things under your belt to know to draw from to be able to play. But I think a lot of times, and I'm saying this about myself too, like I'll get stuck in my head, and then like what I'm playing just like sucks because I'm not playing out of my heart, I'm not playing in the moment. And that's
Yeah.
always the battle, I think, is like, removing like, okay, I don't want to think about what people are thinking about me right now. Like if you can just get to
Hmm.
that place every time when you play where you're just free to like just truly play without any kind of like even self-inflicted judgment.
Yeah.
That's like the green zone. But I don't I'm still working on that. But
Totally.
yeah, so that's I think that's why I'm drawn to like the bluesy element or like the organ jazz at times. It's just like, well, no one's gonna care about how much I'm playing on this gig. You know what I mean? Because that's not the
Yeah.
goal.
Well, that and it was your gig, right? Probably, and you were calling the tunes, and I love that you had Ben on that gig because I know Ben is the same way as a player. Like he doesn't necessarily he's not going to vibe you, and he plays a lot of bluesy stuff too, but he can do all that other stuff. But I think
A
that's
lot of
another
stuff,
reason
yeah.
why it's just so important to pick the right players to play with too, that don't give that negative energy or aren't going to judge what you're doing. Great. Yeah, perfect answer. So the last question is again totally unrelated to the previous. What other instruments do you play and how do they help your saxophone playing?
Hmm. Well, I have been in the shed with the flute a lot recently.
Nice.
And you've played with me before, I need to. So
No way. I mean,
yeah, I'm trying to
anything you say about your flute playing
proud of
is shared with the way I feel about mine. So
I what I've learned about the flute is like it definitely helps my sound on saxophone, obviously, because it requires a lot more air to be able to play with a good supported sound above certain ranges. It's like you really have to have your core kind of activated, and it's air, but it's also like this like mental shift, like okay, this needs to be coming from a deeper place, and so that totally applies to saxophone. And I feel like if I start shedding on flute first, it like makes my sound on saxophone better because I'm already like just like used to playing with like such a supported sound and like using way more air on flute. So then when I get to saxophone, I'm like, oh, like it's easy now.
hmm
Like yeah, it's just different. But
yeah, it helps you focus the
yeah,
air.
I don't know what else to say.
No, that's great. That's a
Yeah.
great answer, and it's been interesting getting different answers on the different instruments because some like I feel like all saxophone players double on some degree, but some might not consider themselves like players of that instrument, which I think every player like kind of doesn't respect their doubling abilities, and it's something that it's just because we're so committed to being great saxophone players that we in order to call ourselves a flute player or a clarinet player, we'd have to obviously spend a lot more time at it. But the reason I make that, I just wanted to ask that question is because even if you don't become a master of the flute or the clarinet or piano or anything like that, they always inform your saxophone playing, and like your answer that it helps your airflow and like helps you focus the air column is great. And there's just so many benefits that you can get, and sometimes unknown ways, like you wouldn't maybe have expected that to be a result of playing the flute, but there it is. And now you have that. And I'm sure you play piano too, right? Probably to
Um,
do some of the composing and stuff that you do.
yeah, strictly composing tool. I don't think I could sit down and play a song for you and it would sound good. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah. That's always like illuminated for me around like Christmas time when family gets together and they want to play whatever, which
oh
didn't
yeah.
didn't actually happen this year, but I'm just like, man, this seems like something I should be able to do, but I can't. So I'm the same way where I'll definitely like sit down to write at the piano and stuff, but I would never want to have to play with people as a piano player. That would not go well. But very cool. Well, these are all super great answers, Jordan. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Oh,
And
thanks for having me.
yeah, my pleasure.